The scent of pine and damp earth clung to everything in this territory. My clothes, my hair, even the pillow I'd been crying into for the past hour. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the cabin window, watching the forest sway in the wind, listening to the distant howls that made my chest tighten with a longing I had no right to feel. I didn't belong here. I never had. The pack gathering was tonight, and I could already hear them preparing. Laughter echoing through the trees, the thud of barrels being rolled across wooden decks, the sharp commands of enforcers organizing the ceremony. Every full moon, they celebrated their strength, their unity, their pure bloodlines. And every full moon, I made myself smaller, hoping no one would remember I existed. But they always did. Half-breed. Mistake. The human who thinks she's one of us. I wrapped my arms around myself, feeling the familiar ache settle deep in my bones. My mother had been human, soft-spoken, gentle, with hair the color of wheat fields in summer. I inherited that from her, along with her fragility. My father had been a wolf, though I barely remembered him. He'd died when I was 6, leaving me to navigate a world that saw me as contamination, a stain on their sacred genetics. The worst part? I couldn't even shift. 23 years old, and I'd never felt the transformation they all spoke of with such reverence. No surge of power, no connection to the moon, no wolf rising beneath my skin. I was trapped in this human body, too weak to fight, too slow to run, too different to ever truly belong. A knock at the door made me jump. "Elena?" My cousin Mira's voice was soft. "Careful, you need to get ready. The Alpha King arrives in an hour." My stomach dropped. "He's coming here?" "The treaty negotiations," Mira reminded me, her voice muffled through the door. "Our pack and the Northern Throne. Everyone has to attend. Everyone." I closed my eyes, fighting the wave of anxiety that threatened to pull me under. The Alpha King, Dominic Ashford, was a legend even among wolves, ruthless, powerful, descended from the original bloodline. They said he'd never taken a mate, that he'd killed challengers with his bare hands, that his eyes could see through any deception. And tonight, I would have to stand in the same clearing as him, trying not to faint from fear. "I'll be out in 10 minutes, I managed to say. Mira hesitated. "Wear something nice, but not too nice. You don't want to stand out." The unspoken message was clear. Don't embarrass us. Don't remind everyone what you are. I waited until her footsteps faded, before moving to the small dresser where I kept my few belongings. My fingers trembled as I pulled out a simple dress, deep green, long-sleeved, modest, nothing that would draw attention, nothing that would make them think I was trying to be more than I was. As I changed, my gaze fell on the mirror, and I forced myself to look. Pale blonde hair that never quite lay flat, gray eyes that seemed too large for my face. Skin that bore no marks, no scars from battles I'd never fought. I looked exactly like what I was, a human girl playing dress-up in a world of predators. But there was something else, something I'd been hiding for 3 months now. My hand moved instinctively to my stomach, pressing against the slight curve that my loose clothing concealed. So small still, barely noticeable, but undeniably there. The memory crashed over me like a wave, pulling me back to that night in the border town, the human settlement where I'd gone to escape the pack's cruelty for just one evening. The bar had been loud, crowded, anonymous, and he'd been there. Tall, dark-haired, with eyes that seemed to glow even in the dim light. I hadn't known who he was, not really. He'd told me his name was Nick, that he was passing through, that he'd felt drawn to me in a way he couldn't explain. We'd talked for hours, about everything and nothing. He'd made me feel seen for the first time in my life, and when he'd kissed me, when he'd taken me back to his room, I'd let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I could have one night of being wanted. One night of being normal. I hadn't known he was the Alpha King. Hadn't known that the mate bond I'd felt pulling at my chest was real, was sacred, was completely impossible for someone like me to actually claim. By the time I'd woken the next morning, he was gone. No note, no explanation, just the fading scent of pine and something wild, and the growing certainty that my life had just become infinitely more complicated. Because 3 weeks later, I'd realized I was pregnant, and 2 weeks after that, I'd felt the first flutter of movement that was too strong, too other to be human. Whatever was growing inside me, it wasn't entirely mine. It was his. And if the pack ever found out that I, a human, an omega, barely tolerated by my own family, was carrying the child of their alpha king, a child that would be born with abilities I could never possess, they would kill us both. A horn sounded in the distance, long and low, signaling the Alpha King's arrival. My heart hammered against my ribs as I smoothed down my dress one final time, forcing my breathing to steady. I would go to the gathering. I would stay in the shadows. I would survive this night the way I'd survived every other humiliation, every other rejection, and I would protect this secret, no matter what it cost. The clearing was already packed when I arrived. Wolves of every rank gathered in a loose semicircle around the massive stone platform where the pack leaders stood. Torches blazed against the darkening sky, casting dancing shadows across faces both familiar and hostile. I kept to the edges, positioning myself behind a group of younger wolves who were too excited about the king's arrival to notice me. I heard he's never taken a mate, one of them whispered, her eyes bright with anticipation, that he's waiting for someone worthy of the throne. Someone pure, another added, shooting a quick glance in my direction before looking away. The implication was clear. I swallowed hard, focusing on the tree line instead, trying to ignore the familiar burn of shame in my chest. My cousin Mira appeared at my side, her hand closing around my wrist in a grip that was just slightly too tight. "Stay quiet," she hissed. "Don't draw attention, and for the love of the moon, don't do anything stupid." Before I could respond, a hush fell over the crowd. The air itself seemed to change, growing heavier, charged with a power that made every wolf stand straighter, bare their throats in instinctive submission. He was here. The Alpha King emerged from the forest with a grace that seemed impossible for someone so large. He was taller than I remembered, broader through the shoulders, moving with the controlled violence of a predator who knew exactly how dangerous he was. His dark hair was slightly longer now, falling across his forehead, in a way that made him seem younger than the legend suggested. But his eyes, those same golden amber eyes that had looked at me with such unexpected tenderness 3 months ago, they were cold now, distant. The eyes of a ruler surveying subjects, not a man remembering a stolen night. My breath caught in my throat. My wolf, the one I didn't have, the one that should have been silent, stirred for the first time in my life, reaching toward him with a desperation that terrified me. Mate, mate, mate. No, this couldn't be happening. Not here, not now. Dominic's gaze swept across the assembled pack, and for one heart-stopping moment, his eyes locked on mine, his nostrils flared slightly, his body going completely still in a way that made every instinct I possessed scream at me to run. He recognized my scent, and judging by the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides, he was absolutely furious. The Alpha King's arrival ceremony dragged on like a blade slowly piercing skin. I couldn't breathe properly, couldn't think past the thundering of my heart as Dominic stood on that stone platform, discussing territory boundaries and trade agreements with our pack leaders. As if he hadn't just looked at me like I was a ghost, he'd thought he'd successfully buried. His voice was different than I remembered. Harder, more commanding. The man who'd whispered against my skin in that darkened room, who'd traced the curve of my spine with reverent fingers, who'd told me I was beautiful in a way that made me believe it, that man had vanished completely. In his place stood the Alpha King, cold and untouchable, discussing wolf politics with the same detached efficiency as someone cataloging inventory. But every few minutes, his gaze would drift back to where I stood in the shadows, and each time, the air between us would crackle with something that made my skin prickle, made the secret I carried press more heavily against my ribs. "The Northern Throne requires assurance of loyalty," Dominic said, his words carrying easily across the silent clearing. "Any pack under my protection must prove their strength, their unity, their commitment to our pure bloodlines." Pure bloodlines. The words landed like stones in my stomach. Our pack leader, Garrett, a massive gray wolf who'd never hidden his disgust for my existence, stepped forward with a deferential bow. "We understand, Your Majesty. Our pack has maintained strict breeding protocols for generations. We eliminate any weakness that might contaminate our line. His eyes cut to me for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Heat flooded my cheeks, shame mixing with a new emotion I'd never felt before. A fierce, protective anger that had nothing to do with myself and everything to do with the life growing inside me. Is that so? Dominic's voice had dropped an octave, taking on a dangerous edge that made several wolves whimper involuntarily. And yet I smell something interesting in your territory. The clearing fell into absolute silence. I could feel dozens of eyes turning toward me, could sense Mira's fingernails digging into my arm as she tried to make me invisible through sheer force of will. Garrett's confusion was evident. Your Majesty? There's a human scent mixed with wolf. Dominic descended from the platform with predatory grace, his gaze never leaving mine, strong enough to suggest permanent residence. I was under the impression your pack didn't tolerate such arrangements. My legs threatened to give out. He was going to expose me, going to force Garrett to explain my presence, my parentage, my complete unworthiness to even breathe the same air as these purebloods. And then he was going to, what? Claim his child? Deny it? Have us both killed to protect his precious reputation? Garrett's expression darkened, an unfortunate inheritance from a previous leader's indiscretion. The half-breed is barely tolerated, kept only out of obligation to her dead father. She knows her place. Does she? Dominic was closer now, close enough that I could see the muscle ticking in his jaw, could feel the heat radiating from his body. And what place is that exactly? She lives apart from the pack proper, Garrett explained, his tone making it clear how much he resented having to justify my existence to anyone. She doesn't participate in ceremonies, doesn't claim any pack privileges. She's essentially human, Your Majesty. Barely worth acknowledging. Something flickered in Dominic's eyes, something hot and violent that was there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. When he spoke again, his voice was silk over steel. I see. And this half-breed. She's here tonight? Unfortunately, yes. Protocol requires, bring her forward. The command cut through the air like a whip. Mira's grip on my arm tightened to the point of pain, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Around us, wolves began to whisper, the sound building like distant thunder. Your Majesty, I don't think, Garrett began. Now. There was no disobeying that voice. It carried the weight of absolute authority, of power so complete that resistance wasn't even a consideration. I felt myself being pushed forward, stumbling slightly as the crowd parted around me, creating a path that felt more like a gauntlet. Every step toward Dominic felt like walking toward my execution. My dress suddenly seemed too thin, too revealing, despite its modest cut. I could feel everyone staring at my blonde hair, so obviously human, so clearly wrong among all these dark-haired wolves, could feel their judgment, their disgust, their satisfaction that the half-breed was finally getting what she deserved. But underneath all that fear, underneath the shame that had been drilled into me since childhood, something else stirred. That same pull I'd felt 3 months ago. That inexplicable connection that had led me to trust a stranger, to give myself to him completely, the mate bond. Real, undeniable, and completely catastrophic. I stopped 3 feet from the Alpha King, keeping my eyes lowered the way I'd been taught, showing submission even as my wolf, my impossible, suddenly present wolf, snarled at me to look up, to meet his gaze, to claim what was ours. Look at me. The command sent a shiver down my spine. Slowly, fighting every instinct that screamed at me to run, I raised my eyes to meet his. The impact was physical. Those amber eyes bore into mine with an intensity that stole my breath, searching for something I didn't understand. Up close, I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight scar along his jawline, the way his nostrils flared as he drank in my scent, and I could see the exact moment he realized. His eyes widened fractionally, his gaze dropping to my stomach for just a heartbeat before snapping back to my face. The fury that flashed across his features was terrifying, not directed at me, I realized with shock, but at the situation, at himself, at the impossibility of what his instincts were telling him. What's your name? His voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the strain underneath. "Elena." My voice came out barely above a whisper. "Elena Hartley, Your Majesty. Elena." He repeated it like he was tasting it, testing how it felt in his mouth. Then, louder, addressing the entire clearing. "This woman is under my personal protection as of this moment. Any wolf who harms her, threatens her, or shows her disrespect answers directly to me. Is that understood?" The shocked silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the confusion radiating from every wolf present, could see Garrett's face turning an alarming shade of red, could hear Mira's sharp intake of breath behind me. "Your Majesty," Garrett managed, his voice strained. "I don't understand. She's just a—" "I don't recall asking for your understanding." Dominic's tone could have frozen fire. "I've made my decree. See that it's enforced." He turned back to me, and for just a moment, his expression softened into something that looked almost like regret, almost like pain. Then the mask slammed back into place, and he was once again the Alpha King, untouchable and unknowable. "You'll join me for a private audience after the ceremony," he said, quiet enough that only I could hear. "We have much to discuss." It wasn't a request. I managed a shaky nod, my mind reeling. Around us, the pack was erupting into barely contained chaos. Wolves whispering frantically to each other, shooting me looks that ranged from confusion to outright hostility. Whatever protection Dominic thought he was offering, it had just painted an even bigger target on my back. But as I returned to my place at the edge of the clearing, one hand instinctively moving to my stomach, I realized something that made my blood run cold. He hadn't claimed me as his mate. Hadn't mentioned the bond that I knew he must feel as strongly as I did. He'd offered protection, yes, but in a way that kept distance between us, that maintained the carefully constructed walls around whatever truth we'd created that night, which meant he had no intention of acknowledging this child as his. The ceremony continued, but I heard none of it. My mind was too busy racing through scenarios, each one worse than the last. Would he demand I leave the territory? Force me to give up the baby? Have his enforcers ensure I never spoke of what happened between us? Or worse, would he let me keep my secret, but sentence both me and this innocent child to a lifetime of being invisible, unwanted, barely tolerated on the edges of a world we could never truly be part of? The torches burned lower, the moon rose higher, and when the ceremony finally ended, when the other wolves began to disperse toward the feast fires, I remained frozen in place, watching as Dominic's head of security, a severe-looking woman with silver-streaked hair, made her way toward me. "The king will see you now," she said, her voice utterly neutral. "Follow me. And don't try anything foolish." As if I had anywhere to run, the walk to Dominic's temporary quarters felt endless. We passed through parts of the territory I'd never been allowed to enter, places where the strongest wolves lived, where the air itself seemed to hum with power. Other wolves watched us pass with barely concealed curiosity, and I caught fragments of whispered speculation that made my cheeks burn. Finally, we stopped in front of a large cabin at the heart of the territory. The security woman knocked once, then opened the door, gesturing for me to enter. "He's waiting inside." "You have 15 minutes. The door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded terrifyingly final. Dominic stood with his back to me, staring out a window at the moonlit forest beyond. He'd removed his formal jacket, and in just his dark shirt and pants, he looked more like the man I remembered, still powerful, still dangerous, but somehow more real. 3 months, he said quietly, not turning around. 3 months. And you never tried to contact me. My throat tightened. I didn't know how. I didn't even know who you really were until tonight. He turned then, and the anguish in his eyes stole my breath. Until you saw me standing on that platform, playing the part of the merciless Alpha King, and realized exactly how impossible this situation is. I never meant, "You're pregnant." The words hung between us, a truth that could no longer be avoided. "Yes," I whispered, "with my child." "Yes." He closed his eyes, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "Do you have any idea what you've done? What this means?" Anger flared in my chest, sudden and hot. What I've done. You were there too, in case you've forgotten. I thought you were a wolf. The words exploded from him with such force that I took an involuntary step back. Your scent, the way you responded to me, the bond. Everything about you screamed mate. I thought I'd finally found the one wolf strong enough to stand beside me, to help me rule, He broke off, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of pure frustration. If I'd known you were human, I never would have touched you, never would have put you in this position. The words cut deeper than any rejection I'd ever faced from the pack, because this wasn't about me being unwanted or invisible. This was about me being fundamentally wrong, so wrong that even the mate bond couldn't overcome it. I'm sorry, I managed, hating how my voice shook. I'm sorry I'm not what you needed me to be. His expression crumbled for just a moment before he caught himself. Elena. I'll leave, I said quickly, backing toward the door. I'll go somewhere far away, somewhere no one will ever know about the baby. You won't have to worry about your reputation, or your pure bloodlines, or... Stop. He was across the room in seconds, his hands gripping my shoulders, his eyes blazing into mine. You think I care about reputation? About what other wolves think, don't you? I searched his face desperately. You just spent an hour preaching about pure bloodlines and eliminating weakness. What else am I supposed to think? You're supposed to think that I'm trying to protect you. His voice cracked on the last word. That I'm terrified every second you're in this territory, because if anyone discovers what you are to me, what you're carrying, they'll kill you just to get to me. The Northern Throne has enemies, Elena. Wolves who would love nothing more than to eliminate my bloodline, to prove that I'm weak, that I'm unworthy of leading. Then what do you want from me? Tears burned at the back of my eyes. What am I supposed to do? His hands gentled on my shoulders, his thumbs tracing small circles that sent shivers down my spine despite everything. I want you to trust me, just for a little while longer. I need time to think, to plan, to figure out how to keep both of you safe. Both of us, I repeated, my hand moving instinctively to my stomach. His gaze followed the movement, and something in his expression shifted, softened into something that looked almost like wonder. May I? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Slowly, reverently, he placed his hand over mine, his palm large and warm against the slight curve of my belly. The moment his skin made contact, I felt it, a pulse of energy, of connection, of something ancient and powerful recognizing itself, and from inside me, an answering flutter, strong, insistent, undeniably other. Dominic's eyes widened, his breath catching. It's already shifting, he whispered, even in the womb, bleeding through the fear. Elena, this child... A howl split the night air, close and urgent. Then another, and another, until the entire territory seemed to erupt with warning calls. Dominic's head snapped up, his body going into full alert. Stay here, he commanded, already moving toward the door. Don't leave this cabin for any reason. What's happening? But he was already gone, the door slamming behind him, leaving me alone with my racing heart and the growing certainty that whatever protection he'd offered tonight had just run out of time. The howls continued for hours, a cacophony of warning and rage that made the walls of the cabin seem paper thin. I paced the small space like a caged animal, my hands pressed protectively over my stomach, trying to make sense of the chaos erupting outside. Through the window, I could see wolves racing through the darkness, their forms blurring between human and beast. Torches blazed to life across the territory. Voices shouted commands I couldn't quite make out, and somewhere in the midst of it all was Dominic, the Alpha King, dealing with whatever threat had arrived at the worst possible moment. The security woman, I'd heard someone call her Catherine, burst through the door just as dawn began to gray the sky. Her clothes were torn, blood spattering her shirt, though I couldn't tell if it was hers or someone else's. You need to come with me, she said without preamble. Now. What's happening? Where's... The king is handling it, but we need to move you to a secure location. There's been an incident. The way she said incident made my blood run cold. I followed her outside, where 3 other enforcers immediately surrounded us, forming a protective barrier as we moved swiftly through the awakening territory. Wolves stared as we passed, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. Word had clearly spread about Dominic's declaration of protection, and judging by the whispers that followed our group, not everyone was pleased. Half-breed getting special treatment, I heard someone mutter. Probably spreading her legs for the king, another voice sneered. Catherine's head whipped around so fast I almost didn't see the movement. One more word, she growled, her eyes flashing yellow, and I'll personally remove your tongue. The king's orders are absolute, or do you need a reminder of what happens to wolves who question his authority? Silence fell, heavy and resentful, but no one dared speak again. We reached a different cabin, smaller and more isolated, tucked against the tree line where the forest grew dense and dark. Catherine ushered me inside, immediately checking the windows and reinforcing the door with what looked like silver-reinforced bars. You'll stay here until the king says otherwise, she informed me, her tone making it clear this wasn't up for debate. Food will be brought twice daily. Don't try to leave. Don't try to contact anyone outside. For your own safety. Please. I grabbed her arm before she could leave. Just tell me what happened. What kind of incident? She hesitated, something like sympathy flickering across her hard features. Rogues. A pack of them tried to breach the northern border just after midnight. They were looking for something. Someone. Her gaze dropped meaningfully to my stomach. Somehow they knew about you. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. That's impossible. No one knew except the king. And now me. And whoever else was close enough to hear your conversation last night. Catherine's expression darkened. These cabins aren't as soundproof as they should be. If someone was listening, if they passed that information to the rogues. She didn't need to finish. I understood perfectly. In less than 12 hours, I'd gone from being an invisible half-breed to being a liability, a weakness in the Alpha King's armor that his enemies would exploit without hesitation. How many? I asked quietly. How many rogues died? All of them. The king doesn't leave survivors when it comes to threats against what's his. She studied me with sharp eyes. You should know. He fought like I've never seen before. Absolutely savage. Whatever you are to him, it's more than just politics or obligation. The words should have comforted me. Instead, they only amplified the fear coiling in my chest. Because being important to Dominic meant being a target, and targets, in this world, rarely survived long. Catherine left, and I was alone again. The cabin was sparse but functional. A bed, a small table, a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in. A prison dressed up as protection. I sank onto the bed, exhaustion finally catching up with me, and placed both hands over the small life growing inside me. I'm sorry, I whispered to the child who hadn't asked for any of this. I'm so sorry you're going to be born into this mess. A flutter answered me, stronger than before, insistent, reassuring. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the window and someone was knocking on the door. Not Catherine's sharp, efficient knock, but something gentler, almost hesitant. Elena? It's Mira. I opened the door to find my cousin standing there with a basket of food, her expression caught between concern and something that looked uncomfortably like fear. They said I could bring you breakfast, she explained, slipping inside quickly and closing the door behind her. Since I'm family, they thought you might trust me more than the enforcers. I took the basket, suddenly aware of how hungry I was. Thank you. We sat in awkward silence while I ate, the distance between us feeling wider than the few feet that separated our chairs. Mira had never been cruel like the others, but she'd never defended me either. She existed in that careful middle ground of people who disapproved of injustice, but lacked the courage to fight it. Everyone's talking about what happened last night, she finally said. About the king's declaration, about the rogues, about you, I can imagine. Elena. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. What's really going on? Why would the Alpha King care about a half-breed from a minor pack? What did you do? The question hung between us, loaded with implications I couldn't begin to address. What had I done? Fallen in love with a stranger in a bar? Believed for one foolish night that I could be normal? Created a child who would be hunted for the rest of its life simply for existing? I don't know. I lied. Maybe he pities me. Maybe he's making some kind of political statement about tolerance. Mira's eyes narrowed. You're lying. I've known you your whole life, Elena. I know when you're hiding something. Her gaze dropped to my stomach, lingering there for a beat too long. And I know you've been wearing looser clothes lately, avoiding the communal meals, disappearing for hours at a time. My heart stopped. Mira, you're pregnant. It wasn't a question. And somehow, impossibly, it's his, the Alpha King's. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think past the rushing in my ears. Please, I managed, please don't tell anyone. If they find out, they'll kill you both. Mira's face had gone pale. Elena, do you understand what you've done? A human Omega carrying the Alpha King's child? This isn't some romance story. This is a death sentence. I know. The words burst from me with more force than I intended. Don't you think I know that? I didn't plan this. I didn't ask for any of this. I just wanted one night where I wasn't the half-breed everyone despises. One night where someone looked at me like I mattered. Tears were streaming down my face now. Months of fear and loneliness finally breaking through the careful walls I'd built. Mira stared at me, her expression cycling through shock, horror, and something that might have been sympathy. How far along? She asked quietly. 3 months. Almost 4. And the king knows? Since last night. Mira stood abruptly, pacing the small space with nervous energy. Okay. We need to think. If the rogues already know, then others will too. Word spreads fast among the packs, especially when it involves the Northern Throne. You can't stay here. Where would I go? I have no money, no connections outside the pack. There are human settlements, places where wolves rarely go. You could disappear, raise the child away from all this politics and bloodshed. She turned to me, her eyes fierce. You could have a normal life, Elena. Isn't that what you've always wanted? It was. God help me, it was. The thought of escaping to some quiet human town, raising my child in peace, never having to see the disgust in another wolf's eyes, it was everything I'd dreamed of since childhood. But it would mean leaving Dominic, severing the mate bond that pulled at my chest with every breath, denying my child the chance to know their father, to understand the wolf heritage that flowed through their veins. I can't, I whispered. Why not? Because he's my mate. The words felt like confession and condemnation all at once. Even if he doesn't want me, even if I'm everything wrong for him, the bond is real, and I can't just walk away from that. Mira sank back into her chair, her face troubled. Then you need to be smarter than you've ever been. The pack is divided right now. Some wolves respect the king's authority, but others see you as contamination that needs to be eliminated. And there are factions beyond our territory who would love nothing more than to use you against him. What am I supposed to do? Survive. Stay quiet, stay protected, and pray that the king figures out a solution before... She cut off abruptly, her head snapping toward the window. A second later, I heard it too. Raised voices outside, coming closer. Angry voices. Mira moved to the window, peering out carefully. It's Garrett, and he's brought the council. My stomach dropped. The council was made up of the oldest, most traditional wolves in the pack, the ones who believed in pure bloodlines above all else, who'd made my childhood a living nightmare with their casual cruelty and contempt. They're coming here, Mira breathed. Elena, hide. Get in the bathroom and don't come out no matter what you hear. But now! I scrambled into the tiny bathroom just as heavy footsteps approached the cabin door. Through the thin walls, I heard Garrett's voice, cold and authoritative. Open this door, girl. Council business. She's under the king's protection, Catherine's voice responded, hard as iron. No one enters without his explicit permission. The king isn't here, and we have questions that need answering about last night's attack. Questions about why rogues suddenly knew to target this specific territory, this specific girl. Are you suggesting she somehow contacted them? Catherine's voice dripped with disdain. A half-breed with no connections, no resources, who's been trapped in this territory her entire life. I'm suggesting, Garrett said slowly, that her very existence is a liability. One the king may not fully understand given his limited exposure to our pack's dynamics. The bathroom door suddenly rattled, and I realized with horror that they'd gotten past Catherine. Through the crack, I could see 3 council members enter the cabin, their eyes scanning the space with predatory focus. "Where is she?" one of them demanded. Mira's voice, shaky but defiant. "I don't know. She was here when I arrived, but..." The bathroom door exploded inward, ripped off its hinges by Garrett's massive hands. He stood there, his eyes cold and merciless as they locked on me. "There you are, the little half-breed who's caused so much trouble." He reached for me, his fingers like iron bands around my arm. "The council has some questions for you, girl, and you're going to answer them truthfully, or what?" Dominic's voice cut through the cabin like a blade, cold and absolutely lethal. I couldn't see him from my position, but I felt the wave of power that rolled off him, felt every wolf in the room drop into instinctive submission. "Your Majesty," Garrett stammered, his grip on my arm loosening. "We were simply violating my explicit orders, threatening someone under my protection, forcing your way into a secured location." Each word was precisely enunciated, dripping with barely restrained violence. "Choose your next words very carefully, Garrett. They may be your last." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, quietly, Garrett released my arm and stepped back, his head bowed in submission. The other council members followed suit, though their expressions remained hostile. Dominic appeared in the doorway, and the sight of him stole my breath. He was still in the same clothes from last night, now torn and blood-stained. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and a fresh cut ran along his cheekbone. He looked exhausted, dangerous, and absolutely furious. "Everyone out," he commanded softly, "except Elena." They filed out quickly, Catherine shooting me an unreadable look as she passed. Mira hesitated at the door, her eyes meeting mine with a message I couldn't quite interpret. Then she too was gone. The door closed, and Dominic sagged against it, the mask of the Alpha King cracking to reveal the exhausted man beneath. "Are you hurt?" I asked, taking an unconscious step toward him. "Nothing that won't heal." He pushed off from the door, crossing the space between us in 2 strides. His hands came up to frame my face, his thumbs brushing away tears I hadn't realized I'd shed. "I'm sorry. I should have anticipated this, should have posted more guards, should have..." "You can't protect me from everything," I said softly, "not when half the pack wants me dead." "Then we leave." The words were sudden, decisive. "Tonight. There's a safe house 3 territories over, one that only my most trusted wolves know about. You'll stay there until after the child is born, until I can figure out how to what?" I pulled back slightly, searching his face. "Hide me away forever. Pretend I don't exist except when it's convenient. Raise our child in secret and shame." Pain flashed across his features. "That's not what I..." "Then what?" My voice cracked. "What's the plan here, Dominic? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're trying to have it both ways. Keep me safe, but keep me hidden. Protect your bloodline, but deny your mate. And I can't live like that. We can't live like that." He was quiet for a long moment, his hand still cradling my face, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that made my heart ache. "You're right," he finally whispered. "And I'm terrified, because the only solution I can see, the only way to truly protect you both, means destroying everything I've built. Every alliance, every treaty, every carefully maintained relationship with the traditional packs. It means war, Elena. Civil war among the wolves, with you and our child at the center of it." I placed my hands over his, feeling the slight tremor in his fingers. "Then maybe it's time for a war. Maybe it's time someone fought for the wolves who don't fit the mold, who aren't pure enough or strong enough or traditional enough. Maybe our child deserves to be born into a world that's changing, not one that's stagnant and cruel." Something shifted in his expression, determination hardening beneath the fear. "You're asking me to risk everything." "I'm asking you to choose." I met his gaze steadily, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. "Choose us. Not because it's easy or politically advantageous, but because it's right. Because this child, our child, deserves a father who stands beside them proudly. not one who hides them away in shame. Dominic stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the war playing out behind his eyes. Then, slowly, he lowered his forehead to mine, his breath mingling with mine in the small space between us. "You're the bravest person I've ever met," he murmured, "braver than any wolf in my court. And you're absolutely right." He pulled back slightly, and when he met my eyes again, there was a new resolution there, fierce and unyielding. "Tomorrow night, there's a gathering of the Alpha Council. Every major pack leader will be present. I was going to use it to finalize the territory agreements." His jaw tightened. "Instead, I'm going to announce that I've found my mate, a human Omega carrying the future heir to the Northern Throne, and anyone who objects can challenge me directly." The words should have terrified me. Instead, I felt something like hope unfurling in my chest. "They'll try to kill us," I said quietly. "Let them try." His voice was pure steel. I didn't become Alpha King by backing down from fights, and I sure as hell am not going to start now. He kissed me then, fierce and claiming, and I tasted the promise in it, the vow that whatever came next, we would face it together. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of preparation and mounting tension. Dominic had moved me to his personal quarters, a statement in itself that sent shockwaves through the pack. Catherine and a rotating guard of his most loyal enforcers stood watch outside, while inside, I tried to process the magnitude of what was about to happen. "You don't have to attend the gathering," Dominic said for the third time that evening, watching as I struggled with the fastenings of the dress his people had brought me. It was deep sapphire blue, elegant but modest, with fabric that skimmed rather than clung. Appropriate for a future queen, they'd told me. I still felt like a fraud. "Yes, I do." I met his gaze in the mirror. "If you're going to announce me as your mate, I need to be there. I need to stand beside you and show them I'm not afraid. Even though you are. Especially because I am." I turned to face him, taking in the formal clothes he wore. Black on black, with the silver insignia of the Northern Throne emblazoned across his chest. He looked every inch the Alpha King, powerful and untouchable, but his eyes, when they met mine, were warm with something that looked dangerously like love. Fear doesn't mean I'm weak. It means I understand the stakes. He crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling me against him with a gentleness that contradicted his strength. "When this is over," he murmured against my hair, "when we've survived whatever hell is about to break loose, I'm taking you somewhere far away. Just the 3 of us. Somewhere you can breathe without looking over your shoulder." Sounds perfect. I let myself sink into his warmth for just a moment, memorizing the steady beat of his heart, the scent of pine and something wild that clung to his skin. Then I pulled back, forcing steel into my spine. "But first, we have to survive tonight." The gathering was held in the largest clearing on pack territory, beneath ancient trees that had witnessed centuries of wolf politics and bloodshed. Torches blazed against the darkness, casting dancing shadows across the assembled crowd. I'd never seen so many wolves in one place. Alpha from every major pack, their seconds and advisors, council members representing the old traditions. The air itself felt heavy with power, with dominance, with barely restrained violence. Every eye turned to us as we emerged from the tree line. Dominic walked with his hand at the small of my back, a clear signal of possession and protection. I kept my chin high, my gaze steady, even as whispers erupted around us like wildfire. "That's her? The human? She doesn't even look strong enough to survive a shift." "The king has lost his mind." Garrett stood among a cluster of older alphas, his expression thunderous. Beside him, I recognized several council members from yesterday's confrontation, their hostility palpable even across the distance. But there were others too, younger wolves, those from smaller packs, watching with something that might have been curiosity rather than contempt. Dominic led me to the raised platform at the clearing center, the place where pack law was enacted and judgment passed. My legs trembled as I climbed the steps. But I refused to stumble, refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me weak. "Brothers and sisters," Dominic's voice rang out across the clearing, carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I've called this gathering to make an announcement that will change the future of the Northern Throne." Silence fell, thick and expectant. "For years, I've led you with strength, with honor, with unwavering commitment to our laws and traditions. I've maintained our pure bloodlines, eliminated our enemies, expanded our territories. And in all that time, I believed I understood what true strength looked like. He paused, his hand tightening on mine. I was wrong. The whispers started again, confused and uneasy. True strength isn't about bloodlines or dominance or following traditions simply because they've always existed. True strength is about having the courage to change, to evolve, to choose love and compassion even when it's difficult. His voice dropped, became more intimate even as it carried to every wolf present. I've found my mate, and she is everything I never knew I needed. He turned to me then, his eyes blazing with something fierce and tender. Elena Hartley is human. She's an Omega. She carries my child, the future heir to the Northern Throne. And starting tonight, she is your queen. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, chaos. This is madness, Garrett's voice boomed across the clearing. You would pollute our bloodline with human weakness? Make a mockery of everything we stand for? I would choose my mate, Dominic replied calmly, though his jaw was tight with barely restrained fury. As is my right. As is wolf law. Wolf law applies to wolves. Another alpha stepped forward, his face twisted with disgust. Not humans. Not abominations. You're asking us to bow to someone who can't even shift, who has no strength, no power, careful. Dominic's voice dropped to a lethal purr. You're speaking about my mate, my queen. Choose your next words very carefully. The alpha, a massive man with scars crisscrossing his arms, bared his teeth. Or what? You'll kill me for speaking truth, for upholding the very laws you're now breaking? If necessary. Dominic descended from the platform with predatory grace, and I watched in horror as the two alphas began to circle each other. Anyone who threatens my mate threatens me directly, and I've never backed down from a challenge. Stop. The word left my mouth before I could think, loud enough to carry across the clearing. Both men froze, turning to stare at me with identical expressions of shock. Please. This isn't the way. Elena, Dominic began. No. I descended from the platform on shaking legs, very aware that I was about to do something either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. You're right that I'm human, that I can't shift, that by your laws and traditions I have no place among you. I turned slowly, meeting the eyes of as many wolves as I could. But I'm also the woman your king chose. The one carrying his child, and if that child is going to grow up in this world, I need you to understand something. The clearing was absolutely silent now. Every wolf focused on me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. I know what it's like to be different, I continued, my voice steadier than I felt. To be judged for things you can't control. Your blood, your abilities, your heritage. I've spent my whole life being told I'm not enough, that I don't belong, that I'm a mistake that should have been corrected. My hand moved to my stomach, protective and defiant. But this child won't grow up believing they're a mistake. They won't learn to hate themselves for being different. And they won't learn to hate you for being afraid of change. Pretty words, Garrett sneered. But words don't make you strong enough to stand beside a king. You're right. They don't. I met his gaze steadily, but love does. Courage does. The willingness to fight for something bigger than myself, that makes me strong. And if you can't see that, if you're so trapped in your traditions that you'd rather destroy something beautiful than evolve, I paused, feeling Dominic's presence at my back, his silent support giving me strength, then maybe the problem isn't with me. Maybe it's with you. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, from the back of the crowd, a young female wolf stepped forward. She was small, with nervous eyes, and clothes that marked her as low-ranking. I support the king's choice, she said, her voice shaking but determined. I've seen too many wolves cast aside for not being pure enough, for being omegas, or having mixed heritage, or not fitting whatever narrow definition of strength the council decides. If the king is willing to change that, to show us that different doesn't mean weak, then I stand with him. Another wolf joined her, then another. Not many, maybe a dozen out of the hundreds present. But enough to show a crack in the united front of tradition. Garrett's expression darkened. You're fools. All of you. This human has bewitched the king, clouded his judgment, The only thing clouding anyone's judgment is fear. Dominic's voice cut through the growing chaos like a blade. Fear of change, fear of losing power, fear of admitting that maybe, just maybe, our old ways aren't always right. He turned to address the full gathering, his presence commanding absolute attention. I'm not asking you to abandon all tradition. I'm asking you to be wise enough to recognize when tradition becomes tyranny, when it stops protecting us and starts poisoning us. And if we refuse, the scarred alpha stepped forward again, his challenge clear. If we reject this human queen and everything she represents, then you're free to leave the Northern Throne's protection. Dominic's words fell like stones. Any pack that cannot accept my mate is no longer part of my territory. You can make your own way, form your own alliances, but you will do it without my support, my resources, or my mercy. The threat hung in the air, heavy and irrevocable. Several alphas exchanged nervous glances. The Northern Throne's protection was valuable. It meant safety from rogues, access to trade routes, political power. Abandoning it was not a decision to be made lightly. This is blackmail, Garrett spat. This is choice. Dominic's expression was carved from stone. The same choice you forced on countless wolves over the years. Accept what I'm offering, or face the consequences. But make no mistake, Elena is my mate, my queen, and the mother of my heir. That is not negotiable. The standoff stretched on, tension coiling tighter with each passing second. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, could sense the violence hovering just beneath the surface, waiting for the slightest provocation to erupt. Then Catherine stepped forward, dropping to one knee in front of the platform. I pledge my loyalty to King Dominic and Queen Elena, now and always. One by one, his personal guard followed suit. Then wolves from the younger generation. Then some of the smaller pack alphas, those who had always existed on the margins of power. Not everyone, not even close to a majority, but enough to show that Dominic wasn't standing alone. Garrett watched this with barely contained rage, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. This isn't over, he said quietly, his eyes locked on mine. You may have won tonight, little human. But wolves have long memories, and weak links eventually break. He turned and stalked from the clearing, taking a significant portion of the assembled wolves with him. Others followed more slowly, their expressions troubled, but resigned. By the time the clearing finally emptied, less than half the original crowd remained. Dominic's expression was grim as he surveyed the wolves who'd stayed. Thank you, he said simply. Your loyalty won't be forgotten. He turned to me, and despite everything, despite the threats, the divisions we'd just created, the war that was surely coming, he smiled. Well, my queen, that went better than I expected. I laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. That was better? I expected actual bloodshed. He pulled me close, his arms wrapping around me like a fortress. We survived the announcement. The rest, we'll figure out as we go. But as I stood there in his embrace, watching the remaining wolves disperse with expressions ranging from supportive to uncertainly hostile, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd just lit a fuse. And somewhere in the darkness, Garrett and his allies were planning how to use it. The child fluttered in my belly, stronger than ever, as if sensing the danger ahead. I placed my hand over the movement, silently promising this innocent life that we would survive whatever came next. We had to. The days that followed were a strange mixture of unexpected tenderness and constant vigilance. Dominic refused to let me out of his sight, conducting his royal business from our shared quarters, while Catherine coordinated security rotations that kept loyal wolves surrounding us at all times. Word of the announcement spread through the territories like wildfire, sparking reactions ranging from cautious support to outright rebellion. 3 smaller packs formally withdrew from the Northern Throne's protection. 2 alpha challenged Dominic's authority and were defeated in combat so swift and brutal that the others quickly fell silent. And Garrett simply vanished, taking his most loyal followers with him. He's planning something, Catherine reported one evening, her expression grim. My sources say he's been meeting with traditionalist wolves from other territories, building an alliance. Let him. Dominic barely looked up from the reports he was reviewing. We'll be ready. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly tracked toward me as if reassuring himself I was still there, still safe. The weight of leadership was crushing him, I realized, the responsibility of protecting not just me, but every wolf who'd chosen to follow his radical new path. "You need to rest," I told him that night, watching as he paced our bedroom like a caged wolf. "You've barely slept in days." "I can't." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "Every time I close my eyes, I see all the ways this could go wrong, all the ways I could fail you, fail our child. You won't." I crossed to him, taking his face in my hands and forcing him to look at me. "We're in this together, remember? You're not carrying this alone." Something in his expression crumbled. He pulled me close, burying his face in my neck, and I felt the tremor that ran through him. Fear and love and desperate determination all tangled together. "I've never been afraid before," he whispered against my skin. "Not of battles or challenges or political intrigue, but the thought of losing you, of our child growing up without knowing how much they're loved. Elena, I'm terrified. Then we'll be terrified together." I held him tighter, this powerful alpha king who'd chosen to be vulnerable with me, "and we'll fight together, and we'll win together, because that's what mates do." He kissed me then, soft and reverent, and in that moment I felt the bond between us solidify into something unbreakable. Not just desire or duty, but genuine partnership, real love. The child kicked, strong and insistent, and Dominic's hand immediately moved to my stomach. His expression transformed into wonder as he felt the movement, the undeniable proof of the life we'd created. "They're strong," he murmured. "Already so strong. They'll need to be." I covered his hand with mine, "but they'll also need to be kind, compassionate, willing to see beyond bloodlines and traditions to what really matters. Like their mother." He smiled, genuine and warm, the expression transforming his usually stern features. "You're going to be an incredible queen, Elena. These wolves don't know it yet, but you're exactly what they need." I wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that love and courage and compassion could actually change centuries of tradition and prejudice. But in the darkness outside our window, I could hear the distant howls of wolves who disagreed, who saw me as contamination, who would stop at nothing to eliminate the threat I represented. The war Dominic had predicted was coming. I could feel it in the air, taste it in the anxious energy that permeated the territory. The only question was when it would arrive and whether we'd be ready. As if in answer, Catherine burst through the door without knocking, her face pale. "Your Majesty, we have a problem. Garrett has returned, but not alone. He's brought representatives from the old council, wolves who predate even your father's reign, and they're demanding an immediate tribunal." Dominic's expression went cold. "On what grounds?" "They're claiming you're unfit to rule, that your attachment to a human has compromised your judgment and endangered every wolf under your protection." Catherine's eyes flicked to me apologetically. "They're calling for your removal from the throne, and Elena's execution." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. "The tribunal was set for dawn, a deliberate choice," Dominic explained grimly, "designed to catch us off guard and unprepared. The old council didn't just want him removed from power. They wanted to make an example of us, to send a message that deviation from tradition would not be tolerated. "You're not going," Dominic said flatly, blocking the door as I tried to follow him from our quarters. "I'll face them alone." "That's exactly what they want." I stood my ground, even as fear churned in my stomach. "They want to separate us, make you choose between me and the throne. If I'm not there, you lose either way. If you are there, they could—" He couldn't finish the sentence, his jaw working as he fought for control. "Elena, these aren't wolves bound by my authority. The old council answers to no one but themselves. They're judge, jury, and executioner, and they've already decided you're guilty. Then let them look me in the eye when they condemn me." I moved closer, placing my hand over his heart, feeling it race beneath my palm. "I'm done hiding. Done being ashamed of what I am, who I love, what we've created together. If this is the end, I want to face it standing beside you." The anguish in his eyes nearly broke me. But slowly, reluctantly, he nodded. "Stay close to me. No matter what happens, no matter what they say, stay close." Catherine and a dozen of Dominic's most trusted wolves formed a protective circle around us as we made our way to the sacred grove where the tribunal would be held. The sun was just beginning to paint the sky in shades of gray and gold, and the air held that peculiar stillness that comes before violence. The old council waited beneath the ancient oak that marked the heart of Pack territory. There were 7 of them, wolves so old they seemed more myth than reality, their eyes holding centuries of memory and judgment. Garrett stood among them, his expression triumphant, along with several other alphas who'd rejected Dominic's announcement. But it was the figure standing at the center that made my blood run cold. She was ancient, this wolf, her white hair hanging in a long braid down her back, her face lined with age, but her posture ramrod straight. Power radiated from her like heat from a forge. And when her eyes locked on mine, I felt the weight of every terrible story I'd ever heard about the old council made flesh. Dominic Ashford. Her voice was surprisingly strong, carrying easily across the grove. "You stand accused of betraying your sacred duty as Alpha King, of placing personal desire above the welfare of your people, of polluting the pure bloodline with human weakness." Her gaze shifted to me, cold and merciless. "And you, human child, stand accused of bewitching our king, of carrying an abomination that threatens the very foundation of our society." "These accusations are baseless," Dominic said, his voice level despite the fury I could feel radiating from him. "I've broken no wolf law. The bond between mates is sacred. You taught me that yourself, Elder Moira." "The bond between wolf mates," Moira corrected sharply. "Not humans. Not creatures who lack even the most basic connection to the moon, to the wild, to everything that makes us what we are." She stepped closer, her eyes boring into mine with an intensity that made me want to flee. "Tell me, girl, can you shift? Can you hear the moon's call? Can you do anything beyond bleed and breed like the weak little human you are?" The words were designed to humiliate, to make me small. And a few months ago, they would have worked. But standing there with Dominic's hand steady in mine, with our child moving strong and insistent in my belly, I found something I'd never had before. Not just courage, but certainty. "No," I said clearly, meeting her gaze without flinching. "I can't shift. I can't hear the moon. I'm human, and I'll always be human." I paused, letting the words settle. "But I can love. I can protect. I can stand beside the strongest wolf I've ever known and make him better, not weaker, and I can carry a child who will bridge 2 worlds, who will prove that strength isn't about purity. It's about heart." Pretty sentiment. Moira's expression didn't change. But sentiment doesn't change reality. You are a weakness, girl. A vulnerability that our enemies will exploit without mercy. Already, 3 packs have withdrawn their allegiance. Already, rogues gather at our borders, sensing division and discord. How many more wolves must suffer because the king cannot control his base urges? "This isn't about control," Dominic interjected, his voice hard. "This is about evolution, about recognizing that our old ways are dying, that clinging to tradition for tradition's sake is killing us slowly." He turned to address the assembled wolves, many of whom watched with troubled expressions. "How many of you have children who were cast out for being impure? How many have lost mates to the rigid hierarchy that values blood over character? How many have stayed silent while wolves stronger than you abuse their power, all in the name of maintaining tradition?" A ripple went through the crowd. Recognition, shame, anger. I saw several wolves exchange glances, saw the seeds of doubt beginning to take root. "The king speaks of change," Garrett stepped forward, his voice dripping with contempt. "But what he offers is chaos. Weakness breeding with strength until there's no difference between us and the humans we're meant to rule over." Is that the future you want? A future where bloodlines mean nothing, where any human can claim a wolf mate and dilute our power? I offer a future where strength is measured by character, not genetics, Dominic countered. Where omegas aren't treated as lesser, where mixed heritage isn't a death sentence, where— Enough. Moira's command cut through the rising arguments like a blade. The old council has heard both sides. Now we will render judgment." She turned to her fellow council members, and they conferred in voices too low for me to hear. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Dominic's hand tightened on mine, and I could feel the tension in every line of his body, coiled and ready to fight if necessary. Finally, Moira turned back to us. "The council finds that Dominic Ashford has indeed violated the sacred principles of our kind. His attachment to a human, his willingness to produce a mixed-blood heir, his rejection of time-honored traditions, all of these represent a fundamental betrayal of his duty as Alpha King." The words landed like physical blows. I heard Dominic's sharp intake of breath, felt him start to move forward, but Catherine's hand on his shoulder stopped him. However, Moira's gaze swept the crowd, sharp and assessing. The council also recognizes that times change. That rigid adherence to old ways has cost us dearly, in population, in strength, in unity. We have become so obsessed with purity that we've forgotten the most important lesson: a pack survives through adaptation. Hope flickered in my chest, fragile and tentative. Therefore, we offer a compromise. A test, if you will. Moira's eyes locked on mine, and I saw something in them that might have been respect, might have been curiosity. The human will undergo the trials of the moon, 3 challenges designed to prove her worth, her strength, her ability to stand beside an Alpha King. If she survives, if she passes, the council will acknowledge her as queen and the child as legitimate heir. And if she fails? Dominic's voice was carefully controlled, but I heard the fear beneath it. Then she is cast out, the child with her. And you, Dominic Ashford, will choose a proper mate from among the pure bloodlines, or forfeit your throne. The silence that followed was absolute. Every wolf present understood what was being offered. A chance, however slim, for this impossible situation to resolve without civil war. But the cost? What are these trials? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Moira smiled, and it wasn't kind. The first: you must survive a night alone in the deep forest, where rogues hunt and no protection will be offered. The second: you must demonstrate wisdom by resolving a conflict between 2 hostile packs without violence. The third— she paused, her smile widening. The third will be revealed only if you survive the first 2. No. Dominic's rejection was immediate and absolute. I won't risk her life or our child's for your sadistic games. Then you forfeit the throne. Moira's expression hardened, and Garrett becomes Alpha King in your place. Is that what you prefer? The trap was perfect. Accept the trials and risk losing everything, or refuse and lose everything anyway. I could see Dominic calculating odds, searching for another option. But there wasn't one. The old council had backed us into a corner with no escape. I'll do it, I said quietly. Elena, I'll do it, I repeated, turning to face him, not because I have to, because I want to. Because every wolf here needs to see that I'm not some fragile human who'll shatter at the first challenge. That I'm strong enough to stand beside you, strong enough to be their queen. You could die. His voice broke on the last word. Both of you could die. We could die anyway. I cupped his face in my hands, forcing him to look at me. At least this way, we're fighting for something. For a future where our child doesn't have to hide what they are, where other mixed-blood wolves don't have to live in shame. Isn't that worth the risk? For a long moment, he just stared at me, emotions warring across his face. Then slowly, he nodded. But I'm coming with you. For the first trial, at least. They said you'd face it alone. They didn't say I couldn't track you, couldn't keep you in sight even if I can't interfere. That violates the spirit of— Garrett began. I don't care. Dominic's voice dropped to a lethal purr. The council wants to test my mate's strength? Fine. But they don't get to murder her under the guise of tradition. I'll stay distant. I'll intervene only if her life is in immediate danger. But I will be there. Moira considered this, then nodded slowly. Acceptable. The first trial begins at nightfall. 3 days from now. To give the human time to prepare. Her eyes found mine again, sharp and assessing. Use that time wisely, girl. The forest shows no mercy to the weak. The tribunal dissolved, wolves dispersing with expressions ranging from anticipation to dread. Catherine immediately began organizing protection details, planning strategies, while other loyal wolves offered advice about surviving in hostile territory. But I barely heard any of it. My mind was already in that dark forest, imagining the rogues that hunted there, the predators both animal and supernatural that would see me as prey. I was terrified, more terrified than I'd ever been, but I was also determined. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Catherine taught me basic defensive techniques, showed me how to mask my scent and move silently through undergrowth. Other wolves, surprisingly, offered their own advice: how to find water in darkness, which plants were safe to eat, where rogues typically hunted. "You're building allies," Dominic observed one evening, watching as a young Omega demonstrated how to create a makeshift shelter. "They're starting to see you as more than just the human who seduced their king." "I didn't seduce you," I protested, half laughing despite the tension. "Didn't you?" He pulled me close, his hands settling on my waist. One look from those gray eyes and I was lost. One conversation, and I knew I'd never want anyone else. "That's the mate bond talking." "No." He kissed me softly, tenderly. "That's me talking. The bond just made me aware of what I already felt, that you're extraordinary, that you make me better, that I would burn the whole world down before I let anyone hurt you." I leaned into him, letting myself have this moment of peace before the storm. Our child moved between us, strong and vital, and I sent up a silent prayer that they would get to grow up in the world we were fighting for. The day of the first trial arrived too quickly. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Catherine led me to the edge of the deep forest, the wild territory where pack law didn't reach, where survival was the only rule that mattered. "You don't have to prove anything to them," she said quietly, checking the simple supplies I'd been allowed: water, a knife, basic first aid. "You've already proven everything to the wolves who matter, but not to enough of them." I glanced back at the gathered crowd, seeing the mixture of support and hostility. Not yet. Dominic approached, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes betraying his fear. He couldn't show weakness, couldn't let the old council see how much this was costing him, but when he pulled me aside, his facade cracked. "If anything happens, if you're in real danger, howl. I'll hear you no matter how far, and I'll come. Consequences be damned." "I know." I kissed him, pouring every ounce of love and certainty into it. "But I'm going to survive this, for you. For our child. For every wolf who's ever been told they weren't good enough." Moira's voice rang out across the clearing. "The sun sets. The trial begins. May the moon have mercy on your soul, human child." I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and walked into the forest. Behind me, I heard Dominic's howl, not of sorrow, but of faith, of promise. And as the darkness closed around me, as the sounds of the pack faded and the wild rose to meet me, I felt something shift inside my chest. Fear remained, but underneath it, stronger and more certain, was determination. I was Elena Hartley, human, Omega, mate to the Alpha King and mother to the future. And I would survive this night, no matter what it took. The forest tested me in ways I never imagined. Hours passed in a blur of terror and exhaustion as I navigated the darkness, every sound making my heart race, every shadow potentially hiding death. Twice I heard rogues nearby, their harsh breathing, the snap of branches under heavy paws. Both times, I managed to hide, to mask my scent with mud and leaves the way Catherine had taught me. But as the moon reached its peak, I heard something that made my blood freeze. A child's cry. Terrified and desperate, somewhere deeper in the forest. Every instinct screamed at me to ignore it, to focus on my own survival, but I thought of my own child, of the future I was fighting for. And I couldn't. I followed the sound, moving as quickly and quietly as I could through the undergrowth. I found her in a small clearing, a young wolf, maybe 5 or 6 years old in human form, her clothes torn, and her face streaked with tears. Blood matted her hair where something had struck her, and her ankle was twisted at an unnatural angle. "Please," she whimpered when she saw me. "Please help me. They left me here. Said I was too weak, that I'd only slow them down. Rogues. They'd abandoned their own child. I should have kept moving. Should have prioritized my own survival, my own child's safety. But looking at this terrified little girl, I saw myself at that age. Alone, unwanted, desperate for someone, anyone, to show kindness. "It's okay," I said softly, kneeling beside her. "I've got you." The next few hours were the longest of my life. I carried the child, who told me her name was Sophie, through the forest, moving slowly to avoid detection, using every trick I'd learned to mask our trail. My back screamed in protest. My legs trembled with exhaustion, but I kept going. Dawn was just beginning to lighten the sky when I finally stumbled out of the forest, Sophie still in my arms. The gathered wolves erupted into chaos. Shock, disbelief, and something that might have been respect rippling through the crowd. Dominic was there in an instant, his hands gentle as he checked me for injuries. "You found a child," he breathed, wonder in his voice. "You saved her. She needed help." I transferred Sophie into Catherine's waiting arms, watching as the head of security immediately began treating the girl's wounds. What kind of future am I fighting for if I leave children to die in the forest? Moira approached slowly, her expression unreadable. "The first trial was to test your survival instinct, your ability to put yourself first when necessary. Instead, you chose compassion. You risked both your life and your child's for a stranger." "Yes," I said simply, too exhausted to care if that was the wrong answer. The ancient wolf studied me for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. "You pass. Not because you survived, though that matters, but because you proved something far more important. You proved that strength without compassion is just cruelty, and that, human child, is a lesson many wolves have forgotten." Relief hit me so hard I nearly collapsed. Dominic caught me, holding me against him as exhaustion finally claimed its due. "2 more trials," he murmured against my hair. "2 more. And this nightmare ends." But as I looked over his shoulder at Garrett's furious expression, at the old council's calculating gazes, I knew the nightmare was far from over. It was only just beginning. Yet as little Sophie smiled at me from Catherine's arms, as I felt our own child move strong and certain in my belly, as I saw the growing number of wolves watching me with something like hope in their eyes, I realized something profound. I wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. I was fighting for change, for evolution, for a world where wolves like Sophie, and my own child, would never have to wonder if they were worthy of love. And that was a fight worth any trial the old council could devise. The war Dominic had predicted was here, but we were ready, and together, we would win.